but congratulations to you. Let's toggle back and forth. This is white playing black. This is black playing black. White, black, white, black. It's actually the same position. If you like to be a tricky chess player in the opening of the game, boy, today is going to be your celebration because I'm going to teach you how to enter the trickiest transpositions in chess. Now, I assure you, that's actually harder to say than it is to do on the board. But first, let's talk about what is a transposition. Well, that's where you get to a certain position via an irregular set of moves. It would be like if you got to school on time in the morning, but your mom or dad took you using a new road. You still got to the same place, it just got there in a different way. Now look at what you see on the board. Pawn to e3. What could this be? We always teach the pawn going to e4. In fact, this opening has a name. It's called the Vent Cruise opening, or should we call it the Can't Cruise? You see what I did there? Because the pawn can't go 2 squares. Actually, it could have gone 2 squares. We went 1. Why on earth would you go 1 square besides being some sort of weird fan of a late 19th century Dutch chess player? Well, let's pretend in chess that you secretly want to play black, but you went on the ChessKid live server and it gave you white. Well, if you play e3, it's kind of like an invitation to play black, because if your opponent plays e5 and then you play pawn to e4, you have intentionally wasted a move by playing e3 and then e4, which means you're basically giving up the advantage of white and you're playing black. That's right. Incredibly, all of the same moves work out as though you had played black to begin with. Don't believe me? Well, let's set up a new chessboard. Boom! There we go. And pretend you actually are black and your opponent plays e4. Here, you don't have to play e6 and then e5 because you already have the advantage or the disadvantage of the second move. You can play pawn e5 all in one turn, and I assure you, it's actually the exact same opening. If we go back to our first position, boom! Now, if your opponent plays a move like knight to f6, that's the same as knight f3. And if you play knight to c3, that's the same as knight c6, and you're actually playing black. Even though it looks like you're white, I promise you, you're playing black. Now, let's go back to the beginning and pretend you play pawn to e3, the can't cruise opening. Uh-oh, I violated comedy rule number 1. If you don't get a joke the first time, try a second time the exact same joke. Maybe you laughed harder, maybe you didn't laugh at all. But let's say your opponent plays the move pawn to c5, for example. Now, if you play pawn to e4, you have intentionally wasted a move again, and you're playing black. You're actually playing against the English opening, even though it looks like you're playing white. I assure you, you're actually playing a black opening. Now, do I ever expect you to voluntarily play black when you actually get white? Not usually. Most kids prefer the advantage of the first move, but let me show you a different transposition that you could actually use as a secret weapon. Let's go back to our starting position, and boom! What do we have? We have a very strange the queen knight coming out. We almost never see this in Grandmaster play, but it could be a secret weapon against kids, because when you play knight to c3, that's such a strange opening move, you may catch your opponent playing an opening move that gets him or her out of their knowledge bank. If you don't believe me, well, let's test it out. Pretend your opponent plays the very logical move pawn to e5. Now, if you play pawn to e4, you're actually playing a Vienna game. Now, of course, we would usually see pawn e4 on the first move, pawn e5 on the second move, and then you could play the move knight c3. But pretend your opponent does not normally play this double king pawn. Pretend they play, I don't know, the French or the Sicilian. You've now tricked them into an opening they don't know. Could they get in trouble? Oh, you betcha. Let's pretend your opponent plays the move knight to f6, and then you play bishop to c4. Now, we've actually covered this in a different ChessKid video, but here black has to be incredibly careful going for the center fork trick. Black actually can play knight to e4, but if you haven't watched my video on this opening, you're going to get yourself in a lot of hot water very, very quickly. And the reason for that is that white doesn't necessarily have to play knight takes knight. That's kind of what black is hoping for. If white plays knight takes knight, now black can play pawn to d5 and recover the piece because there's a fork with a pretty good position. But if you're white, let's go back. Instead of capturing knight, you could play this really interesting in-between move, queen to h5.
Hello.
And you're threatening the big daddy. Oh yeah, queen takes f7, checkmate on the king, because the bishop, of course, would guard the queen. You're also kind of threatening queen takes e5. And here, there's actually a really high chance, especially if your opponent does not normally play the double king pawn, that they will guard the checkmate using the queen. They could put their queen on e7 or on f6, and both of those moves look very logical because the queen guards the checkmate and it guards this pawn. Uh-oh, but wait a minute. Now if you play knight takes knight, there is no d5 because nothing's guarding the pawn. Oh, and also, the queen is hanging. There's two reasons why black cannot play d5. Here, white has simply won a piece with a winning position out of the opening. That's a great example how using transposition can get your opponent into an opening that they don't know much about. Let's go back. Let's go back to this knight to c3 move. By the way, this is also named after a Dutch player. What were the Dutch doing in the early days of chess? They were just doing weird, wacky chess. Okay, knight to c3. Now, let's pretend your opponent plays the move c5. Okay, very logical move as well. But now, if you play pawn to e4, you have tricked your opponent into a Sicilian. Of course, we would normally see e4 in the first move, c5 on the first move, and then white could play the very logical knight to c3. This is usually going to end up in an opening called the closed Sicilian. Sometimes after d6, white actually plays f4. Yes, it's one of the rare times I'm okay with f4, and this is called the Grand Prix attack. Now, we're not going to get into all the different variations here, but if you are black and you don't normally play the Sicilian, this could be a lot of trouble for you. The knight comes to f3, the bishop comes to c4, and usually white pushes the f-pawn to open up the f-file and gets a really strong attack on the f7 square and the black king. Another very tricky move order, but I'm going to show you my favorite tricky move order. Let's go back. Knight c3. Pretend your opponent plays the move pawn to d5. Now, if you play e4, you've actually tricked your opponent into the Scandinavian defense. Of course, we would usually see e4 on move 1, d5 on move 1, and now, perfectly acceptable is for white to play knight c3 on move 2. Of course, we've played knight c3 on move 1, so we've tricked our opponent into a Scandinavian. I would say it's actually very unlikely that your opponent plays the Scandinavian, so you've successfully tricked your opponent into an opening. And by the way, there are previous videos all over the ChessKid video library and on the ChessKid YouTube library that describe that I like to play this move against the Scandinavian because you get your opponent a little bit into an offbeat opening. Now, we're threatening this pawn twice, and just to show you the kind of trouble that black can get into, let's say that black plays the move knight to f6. Now, we're going to capture this pawn. And when black captures back, we're actually not going to play knight takes knight, because if we do, the queen will take back, and the queen will have a dominant outpost right at the top of the mountain. She is Sir Edmund Hillary, or maybe she's the Sherpa Tenzing Norgay. If you're not a big fan of history or mountain climbing, those are the first two people to climb Mount Everest. Okay, but the queen, we don't want her to get to Mount Everest. We want her to sit back there at the base of the mountain. We're going to play bishop to c4. We're going to double attack this knight. Now, if the knight takes, we have a couple of good moves. You could play queen f3, which is super tricky pants, or you could just play pawn takes, which strengthens your center after you play the move d4. However, let's go back. Let's pretend your opponent guards the knight with a move like e6 or even c6. Either of those moves. I love the move queen to f3, and the attack has begun. The knight is being attacked 3 different times, and of course, if the knight tries to move in this position, there could be big trouble on the f7 pawn. This is a much easier position for white to play. Let's go back to knight c3. Why was this so successful? Because you tricked your opponent into an opening that he or she is more than likely not used to, and you got a big advantage as a result. And finally, to close out our fun transposition video today, I'm going to show you a real-life example from my childhood when I was playing against a chess master, and I used the idea of transposition to get out of the opening with a good position. Okay, so I was white. I played e4, e5. So far, none of what we've said so far seems to apply. I played the move knight f3. Now here, of course, I was expecting the move knight to c6. However, my opponent played the move knight to f6, which is called the Petrov defense. Now, it's not like I'm particularly scared about the Petrov. However, I didn't have a lot of specific preparation against this move. Of course, you can capture, and of course, you can play d4. However, those are the two main moves, and I did not want to walk into my opponent's bank of knowledge. I always like getting my opponent a little bit out of what they have prepared. So in this position, I played the very sensible knight to c3, guarding my pawn. And I thought, okay, my opponent's probably going to play the move knight c6. We're going to be in a 4 knights opening where I'm completely comfortable. And in fact, I once beat a grandmaster in this opening by playing bishop to b5 and playing a very logical, normal game. So that's what I was expecting. However, if we go back, my opponent surprised me. He played bishop to b4, and I thought, oh no, I really don't know this position. I thought, should I take the pawn now? Should I not take the pawn? What do I do? If I ever push my pawn, I've just walked into a pin. I guess I could play this really weird move, knight to d5. But if I do that move, is he going to take my knight? Is he going to move his bishop and take my pawn later? I really didn't know. But something very funny occurred to me. Oh, by the way, before I get to that, I should mention that if I take this pawn, my opponent will just castle, and with the rook coming to e8, yeah, maybe I can survive, but my knight's in danger, my pawn will be double attacked, my king is waiting at the end of the line. I really didn't want to get into that. So, let's go back. Something funny, as I said, occurred in my mind. I thought, wait a minute. I can actually play a black opening as white. Now, things are about to get really weird, so I'm going to need you to screw on your big boy or your big girl brain because, well, you're going to have to do a little bit of mind bending, okay? In this position, I decided to play the move pawn to a3 to attack this bishop and put the question to the bishop, hey, Mr. Bishop, what are you going to do? Now, my opponent played bishop takes knight, okay? And I played pawn on d takes bishop. There's actually a reason I took with that pawn. It wasn't just to get the bishop out quickly. It was so that if my pawn gets captured in this position, I'm going to play the move queen to d5. I'm going to fork the knight and the pawn. And of course, when I capture the pawn, it will be check. That's a lot safer of a chess move than playing knight takes pawn. If I play knight takes pawn in this position, then queen to e7, and you can see big trouble on my knight, big trouble on my king. I could get in a lot of hot water quickly. Okay, so let's go back. I've explained why I played the move d takes c3, but I haven't described why I'm actually playing black. I want you, as best you can, to burn this position into your memory. I want you to look at the screen and nothing else for the next 10 seconds. Memorize the placement of every single piece on the board as best you can. Do you have it memorized? Am I bothering you by talking when you're trying to concentrate? Come on, you listen to music and headphones when you do other activities. You're not confused by Fun Master Mike. Okay, but hopefully you have this in your brain as best you can. Remember, it's actually black's move. Now we're going to go boom. And what have I done? Well, I'm playing a new chess game apparently, okay? But let me show you why I transposed into a black opening. After e4, e5, white can play knight f3, black can play knight c6, and if white plays bishop to b5, the Lopez, or the Spanish opening, black's most common move is a6, putting the question to the bishop. Now, I do want to explain, if the bishop takes the knight right away, and the pawn takes, and white castles, two of the most common moves in this position are pawn f6, which I don't really want to recommend because you're moving your f-pawn, or queen f6. Queen f6 guards the pawn, but it also pressures the knight. And notice white has no light-squared bishop. So black is almost certainly going to put this bishop on the g4 square and double attack this knight, which is pinned. Okay, so that's what black's big plan is. So if white doesn't like that, let's go all the way back to this position when black has played the move pawn a6. There is a very weird line where white plays the move bishop to a4, keeping the bishop on the same diagonal as the knight and the king. And then if black plays knight f6, which is the most common move, then the bishop takes the knight. Super weird. Why would the bishop intentionally go backward only to take the knight on the very next turn, losing a move on purpose? Well, the reason is pretty simple. If the pawn takes, now this square is occupied by the knight. Obviously, the queen can't go to f6 anymore, which means the queen cannot put pressure on this knight. And now, if white ever castles one day, white does not have to worry as much about this knight being pinned because the queen can't get to f6. Now, this is not like a super strong idea by white, but it is a known idea. It's called the delayed exchange variation. Okay, now I do want to go back to this position after pawn takes bishop. Do you recognize anything specific about this position? It's actually the one burned into your brain, only in my game, black did not have to waste a tempo getting into the same position because black moved second. Remember, in the white opening, the bishop wasted a turn by starting here, going back to a4, then taking. But let's go back to my game. This one. Remember, the bishop was here when I played a3 and simply took the knight. This is actually the exact same position with colors reversed. I am playing an opening for black, even though I'm white, and it's super weird, but it did occur to me that this is a playable position, which is why I went into it. That is pretty hard stuff for you to recognize an opening as white actually being an opening as black. But congratulations to you. Let's toggle back and forth. This is white playing black. This is black playing black. White, black, white, black. It's actually the same position, especially if I get rid of those arrows. It is the exact same theory involved. Okay, that last one was a little bit mind-bending. Congratulations to you if you were able to stick through it. There's plenty of other examples of transpositions in chess, but here's just a couple of highlights, and hopefully you can get your opponent out of their preparation and into your own.